let me introduce to all of you our panel, our esteemed panel, I would say. We have, closest to me is Richard McClelland, who is a retired, there's Dan. Richard McClelland is a retired member of the philosophy department here at Gonzaga University. I could go on and on, but I'm going to make these very brief intros, and they're kind of film-related intros. So Richard is the co-editor of the Philosophy of Clint Eastwood, among a lot of other things. Next to him is Mary Pat Treuthart, who's the professor of law here at Gonzaga, co-host of Movies 101 on Spokane Public Radio. And then Dan Bradley, who is a philosopher at Gonzaga, currently, not retired. He, among other things, he teaches philosophy and film, and he's an author and speaker on the films of Clint Eastwood and David Lynch, among other things. And then at the far end is Kevin Decker, philosopher from Eastern Washington University, and the editor or co-editor on, I lost count, a number of books in the philosophy and popular culture series. And I think the most recent one is the recently published Star Wars and Philosophy Strikes Back, This is the Way. So, a fine panel. We did not make plans about who would talk first, so it's a free-for-all. Whoever would like to go first, feel free.
Leading into being first.
Okay, I will begin.
Yeah, the mic will make sure that everybody can hear you. Thank you.
Does this work?
Yes.
Okay. So I told my sister that I was going to participate in this panel, and she said, "Oh, who's sponsoring it?" And I was explaining what was happening, and she said, "You're sort of there for the reason part, correct, and not the faith part." And I was like, "Yeah, I guess that would be me." So just a couple of things. When we're talking about alternate realities and multiverse and parallel universes and so forth, I mean, I'm trusting that the other panelists will be much more enlightening and knowledgeable about the sort of transcendent nature of faith, and also about the philosophical origins of some of the things that we'll be discussing. Because quite frankly, I was the one back in the day who was the biography person. So when I was a kid, I read all the biographies of the inventors and the explorers and so forth and so on. I never read Dune. I never read Narnia. I never read, Lord of the Rings. And so fantasy and science fiction were just not that appealing to me. And so when we talk about alternate realities and alternate universes, that's really, I can say it's not really my thing. But films are, and so I wanted to talk about this as a film in part, and then also share some of my thoughts maybe about alternate realities, such as are represented in this particular film. So I saw Run, Lola Run for the first time on June 4th, 1999 in the Egyptian Theater as part of the Seattle International Film Festival. So with 300 of my closest friends, and at the end of the movie, I mean, there was just like a roar sort of went up from the crowd, and the film ultimately won the Golden Space Needle Award, which is the audience award for the favorite film of the festival. And I think that, in some of these people who go to the Seattle International Film Festival, I mean, there's probably 120 different films, and I know some of those people saw at least 100 of them. And so we're talking about a real group of film nerds. So I think that people were impressed with this particular film for a variety of different reasons. I mean, one, at that point, Tom Tykwer was a new, relatively unknown filmmaker, and Franka Potente, who eventually becomes, at least to American audiences, known for her participation in the Bourne films, was also unknown. And so people really did not know what to expect when they saw this film. I think some people came because it was a short, snappy 80 minutes. But when I think that what this film offered and still offers today is this sort of unique blend of obviously realism, parallelism, animation, and I think that for me, the reason why I like this particular film as compared to some other ones that deal with multiverses or alternate universes is because we see things that could actually happen here, as compared to aliens or space creatures or Martians. Maybe there are Martians, I'm not sure. But I think at one point, Margaret Atwood was asked, she was talking about her own works, and she sort of decried the notion of being characterized as a science fiction author. And she said, my genre is speculative fiction. And people were sort of, poo-pooing that or maybe looking at her contemptuously because they were sort of thinking, own this science fiction genre and your involvement in it. But this feels to me more like speculative rather than alternate or parallel, although of course that's the way it plays out in terms of the manner in which it's filmed. I would also like to talk, because I teach women's studies courses, I think that we are seeing portrayals of women in different capacities throughout this film. And the one thing that remains constant, all these different aspects, all these different people are moving, there are all these moving parts, but Mom, Mutter, remains the same throughout. She says exactly the same lines, and so we wonder, okay, this has been part of Lola's experience and Lola's notion of what women are and look like. And I think that we see Lola's growth throughout the course of the film. Things play out differently, but at the same time, she learns. So in the initial vignette, she knows nothing about how to use a gun. In the second part of it, she realizes how to put the safety off or whatever. We also see the fact that people, how they respond to her differently throughout the course of this film, because you may remember, at least in the first two universes, parallel stories, she's constantly referred to as a little girl, or she's infantilized by everyone who deals with her, and they never suspect, for example, in the second vignette, that she could have been responsible for the crime. When I was in graduate school, my gender studies teacher said, always send an old woman to commit a crime because no one will be looking at her. So that's what I aspire to do during my upcoming retirement. But I think that we see her sort of shift, and we know from the sort of pillow talk that she has with Manni that their relationship, they're sort of exploring and wondering what's going on, and what will it mean, so there are all these allusions to what does death mean, what does the, possible end of our relationship mean. And I was so sort of taken with the end of the film because you can see she sort of becomes a whole person in terms of, she's the empowered one when she goes into the casino, but yet she's still the compassionate one when she's in the ambulance with the guy who's dying. And then at the very end, she knew what was in that bag, we knew what was in that bag, but there was no indication that she was necessarily going to tell Manni what was in that bag. And so perhaps I've gotten a little bit off track from our theme, but I think in terms of alternate explanations and so forth, I always say that so much of life, and I'm talking about this life, this reality, at least what I perceive it to be, is a matter of choice, chance, and circumstance. And I think as a practical matter, Tykwer in this movie captures that so perfectly. And just slight changes are made, and the butterfly effect occurs, and so forth and so on. The final thing I would like to say is, despite my 13 years of Catholic school, I do struggle with the notion of faith, since that is part of what we're discussing this evening. And so sometimes I wonder, did I not get that gift? Like what's really going on here? And I'm a little envious for people who I can see experience the rapture and so forth. But at the same time, I do see the richness of life. I also see the richness in possible alternate realities in terms of dreams and things such as that. And so I'm eager to hear what the panelists have to say, because I defer to their expertise on some of the other topics that are, part of our discussion. But thank you and I know that you didn't let me go first because I was a woman, right?
We were pushing you out in front of the truck.
Oh, okay. And you can see at the end, she's the one who takes control of the situation and so forth. But thank you for allowing me to participate, and thank you for allowing me to say my part, as unenlightened as it might be on our theme for this evening. So, thanks.
Yeah.
Who's next?
Yeah.
Well, thanks you all. It's just an honor to be at such an august panel, really. Richard's a fantastic scholar, and Kevin and Mary Treuthart. I listen to your voices on the radio every weekend, so it's really an honor to be with you here. I'm going to read, because I have so much I want to say, but I want to stay within my 12 minutes. I think this is a great film, and it's not a coincidence that philosophers and other academics love it. It opens with a lot of philosophical questions, and so I want to kind of address it in that way as a philosopher. We philosophers can write about the contingency of the world, but Lola Run depicts it through a fictive story shown in sound and moving image. Let's imagine for a minute an extreme alternative in which the world were strictly determined in a mechanistically causal way, so that if everything we knew about the present, we would be able to predict the future, like in Laplace's demon. This would be a very boring world, because there would be no agency, nothing doing anything. How different and how much more interesting the world would be in which there were events that had ontological consequences, that brought things into being. There is significance and drama in this world, and that's why contemporary philosophers and artists and historians are so enamored with the idea of the event, and why people hate Jared Diamond and Yuval Harari so much. I don't. Now, let's say that human actions have this event-like character, by which they bring into being a new reality. I can't imagine a more evocative elucidation of this truth than Lola Run. The scenes of Franka Potente as Lola running through the streets of Berlin are iconic, and for good reason. She's not jogging for her health. She's seeking an end, and thus all her effort and her youthful intensity is charged with significance. Part of the power of these iconic scenes is, of course, the music. And I'll say I'm not normally a fan of electronic dance music. In fact, I'm one of those incredibly crabby people who's still irritated about the fact that in 1965, halfway through his set at the Newport Folk Festival, Bob Dylan plugged into this electric grid. Okay, all right. Yeah. And if that weren't extreme enough of you, I'd say that priests should not use a microphone at Mass. Right? So humbug on all this. But even I agree that the music in Lola Run is incredibly successful. The driving beats enhance the sense of urgency, vitality, and the end-driven nature of the running. In other words, its meaningfulness as an act of agency. I think there's a feminist reading here. It's a powerful depiction of female agency. Right? Lola's actions matter, and we feel that in her bones when we're watching her. This also contains a narrative and really an ontological element. She's going to save Manni's life. So the significance that we're talking about is not just some voluntaristic act by which we impose meaning onto a meaningless world. That would be more like the kind of Nietzschean or Sartrean response to alternative possible worlds that we see in Everything, Everywhere, All at Once that we heard about last night. Rather, the significance of Lola's actions is rooted in the concrete realities of the world that she's trying to bring about. And only for this reason can that significance be truly compelling. So in my view, the power and meaning that we feel in those running scenes with their thumping music are experienced so positively because there is an intuitive match between the physicality and artistry of the acting and the reality that they depict. We can, in effect, bring about the future through our agency. I would say that this is only a partial truth, however, and I think there's some limitations to the film's depiction of freedom, but maybe more interestingly, that these limitations are revealed by tensions and ambiguities within the film itself. Becoming overly enamored with alternative realities has some significant dangers. I'm not a huge fan of alternative reality. I think there's dangers, and I'm just going to mention two, one ethical and one metaphysical. The main thought experiment in Lola Run does not begin by asking about parallel universes. We start with the suggestion that the past and the present are already fully given and they can't change. Only the future is undetermined. This, I think, helps root the story in actuality in ways that, again, everything everywhere is not rooted. But in playing with the ideas related to the butterfly effect and chaos theory, and to heighten the narrative drama, the film emphasizes wild swings in how good or bad or terrible the future could be. In one future timeline, Lola dies 20 minutes later. In another one, Manni dies, and one they walk off together hand in hand with rich beyond their dreams. In one timeline, one of the innocent bystander ends up dying of a heroin overdose, and the other she ends in a lovely and cute S&M relationship with the other teller. So these kind of radical differences. The problem here is that there's an ethical implausibility, and I think that's captured by Aristotelian thought in a way that modern theories miss, because they rely so heavily on reason and will, but that can be captured by the narrative nature of films. I think film is going to often do something different. Utilitarianism and even more Kantian deontology generally don't give enough weight to the past. They seem to suggest that I could just wake up one day and start doing the right thing, even if I haven't been doing anything like that in the past. The film Up in the Air, I think, is a great cinematic depiction of the implausibility of that view. It's not a perfect movie, but if you haven't seen it, I think it's worth seeing. The ending is really kind of refreshingly honest, because it's kind of showing that you can't just change your life on a dime. Certainly as one gets older, but already by one's 20s, Lola's age, human beings have formed habitual ways of being in the world. And even as children, they already have stable personalities. So these two things, personality and character, mean that our future will largely be the same, no matter how many times we did it over and over again from here, from what we find ourselves. The other philosophical problem that I see with Lola Run is more metaphysical, and it has to do with the general problem of the relation between different versions of the multiverse. The film starts with the idea that the past and present are unalterably given, and only the future is open to multiple possible alternatives. But if the future is open like this, it naturally makes sense to realize that the present is the once open future of the past, and so it has many virtual possible realities. Even if the present has now been reduced to one possibility, the one that's actually happening, it could have been different, such that I, and even more importantly you, could have been in a different present. I think this is a natural form of speculation, and it's inevitable given human grammar. Once we have the conditional subjunctive form of verbs in the present perfect tense, I will almost inevitably ask what I could have been doing now, instead of teaching philosophy at Gonzaga. I think this kind of speculation is particularly true in the case of romantic relationships. Part of the nature of eros is its particularity. When we fall in love with this person. And if they reject us and someone says, don't worry, I can find you an equally good husband or wife, we're saying, look, you're missing the point. Equally, we want to be desired in our own particularity in the relationships of eros. Thus, our natural fantasy is that of It's a Wonderful Life. If I hadn't been born, my lover would remain single and lonely for the rest of his or her life, right? But this kind of counterfactual thinking is misleading. Am I the only possible person with whom my wife could have fallen in love? And in all the billions of possible worlds in which I don't exist, she ends up as a lonely librarian? I would like to think that, but it would be a spectacular self-delusion. But as we saw last night, for those of you who were here, that's not really what A Wonderful Life is saying. And that self-aggrandizing fantasy is not the real problem with the multiverses. So just really to quickly introduce what I think is a better reason to show the problem, is to just mention the name Henri de Lubac, for those of you who might have heard of the Catholic theologian and philosopher. The great question de Lubac is working on concerns the relation between us human beings as natural creatures and God as a supernatural creator. And his answer is that we have a natural desire to be with God, and thus we will always be restless with merely finite goods, no matter how beautiful or wonderful they are. We cannot naturally fulfill that desire for divine life, and we're certainly not owed its fulfillment. But we can hope that in an act of gratuitous generosity, God will grant us participation in his divine reality, and thus the completion of our natural desire. But the point that I think is helpful here is that de Lubac says he does not want to deny that God could have created an alternative reality, in which he placed a purely human, just like me in every regard, except for the fact that this human being had no desire for God, and thus would be fully satiated with finite goods. I can imagine that multiverse. He just says it's a misleading and fruitless thought experiment. And that's because if I were transferred into that world, I would no longer be the same being. and reflections on its truth shed very little light on my own reality in this world. And that's because desires are not pure possibilities towards which I'm indifferent in my nature and can thus choose between in an act of pure will. That's the error of voluntarism. Desires are for an end that is not yet fully present, but they're never purely indeterminate. Rather, they're rooted in my actuality, in my actual lived experience. Desires emerge out of our species' nature. We might call it our eidos in the philosophical tradition. But that nature is an interweaving series of characteristic possibilities that are coherent and stable over time, i.e. that exist and have been brought into existence by an efficacious cause. To make sense of this, de Lubac calls on St. Thomas Aquinas' way of distinguishing a natural desire from an end that is merely possible in the bare sense that God could have it happen to us, a mere potentia obedientialis, if you know the Thomistic tradition. A natural desire brings to the intellectual creature not some random achievement, but its own final perfection. In other words, its perfect happiness. That's a quote from de Lubac. I think this helps us to answer Lola's question that he poses to Manni. You could have met someone else instead of me, right? Why do you love me? Clearly the answer can't just be an act of will. It's unsatisfying that you choose me merely because you wanted to. It has to have something to do with me and my particularity. You might remember Monster-in-Law. It's not exactly a fabulous movie, but at one point Jennifer Lopez covers up her eyes and says, I'll go on a date with you if you can tell me what color my eyes are. In other words, if you desire me in my particularity, my concrete actuality. At least Manni gets that part right. He gets the particularity part. But the question is, why this particular one? Why Lola? His answer is that she's the best. The best what? The best girl. But of course, this isn't satisfying either. The best out of all the girls in the world, Lola asks, right? So are we supposed to think that out of 3 billion women, you've determined that I'm the very best? And no, that can't be right. His love for her can't be a rational assessment of relative quality. And so Manni tries again. My feelings tell me that you're the best. And she says, really? Your heart says, Manni, she's the one, and you say, thanks for the information, I'll see you around? So that isn't satisfying either. In the matter of eros, voluntarism is not satisfactory, but neither is rationalism nor emotivism. It can't be just that the person picked me, or that they judge me to the best, or that they just feel that I'm the best. And we want to be the one in a way that's deeper than can be reached merely by faculty psychology. It's not the other person's will, reason, or emotion alone that can ground love in the face of the threat of alternative possible worlds. Because each of those faculties would have proper grounds for picking another person in a different world. So I think de Lubac has what has to be the answer. It's that in this world, you're the one for me. As a person goes on in a relationship, it's still true that someone else can fulfill his or her desire. But increasingly, that would be a random fulfillment. And conversely, as you build a world together with your lover, this particular one is increasingly the only one who provides a final fulfillment, a fulfillment of your own actualized potentiality, your own lived life. This is due to the other person's concrete qualities, not for some abstract version of me that could exist across different multiverses, but for this concrete me that exists in a way that's ontologically intertwined with you in this world, with a common history, a shared house, a shared mission, maybe a shared family, shared friends, etc. And I think Run, Lola, Run hints at that, or can be read to be doing so. And the key moment in the film, I think, Lola says, I have to make a decision. But when she says that, it remains philosophically underdetermined what she means. She could be saying that she just could randomly decide to love Manni for no reasons that are connected to the world, as I think is true in Everything Everywhere, where we're called to randomly be kind. Or she could be asking, is Manni the one with whom she wants to build a world? And I think that's the more interesting question. Thank you. Well,
Pull a mic down there, Kevin, to make sure we can hear you.
I've gotten softer in my old age, my voice, and my attitude towards students, which is, sure, you don't have to come to class. I want to thank Mary Pat and Dan for their great comments, and I was making all sorts of notes during this viewing, and I realized it was so dark in the room that I can't read a damn thing that I wrote down, as a matter of fact. But I do have Nietzsche in bold print here. I do have a sudden pace slowdown about halfway through the movie, which is an interesting mark. It's almost halfway through the movie that everything really slows down with her and her father in the room, and she's taking him out, to get money and that sort of thing. The two things that really kind of leap to mind here that are kind of overlaps between stuff that I've written on in pop culture and philosophy and this movie are, first of all, the interesting job of the narrator or the auteur, the creator of the film or the television show, to alter time in ways that make effective movies and TV shows about time, whether they're science fiction or not, that make them time machines. If we think about it, right, not only does the final cut of a film involve many different shooting periods at many different times in perhaps many different countries, but now, of course, we have entire parts of the film that are CGI that never occurred anywhere at any point and are just simulations that are knitted in or form the background. And of course, I'm channeling Benjamin, or trying to, Walter Benjamin and all this, and the work of art in the age of mechanical reproduction, because it seems to me that multiverses are attractive to us as consumers of pop culture, because they help to organize space and time in a different way that we don't encounter on a normal basis. We have a fairly linear lifestyle and a linear view of time and that sort of thing. But comic books do this really well, which is, of course, one of the earliest non-literary science fiction uses of it. For a while there in the 80s, maybe even into the 70s, every single major comics event at DC or Marvel ended up being some sort of crossover event, right? And then that crossover fever caught on, and they started doing it between television shows and that sort of thing. But obviously, not so much comic books, although there's some fine animation in here, but music videos, right, are a major. In fact, it's kind of surprising me Lola was made in 1998, not just a little bit earlier, because the heyday of music videos and the way in which they slice and dice time and take us back to the beginning of an experience, as we did 3 times in this one, by having similar or the same scenes filmed and edited in. The editing is the incredible part. I mean, I don't want to be blasphemous, Mary Pat won't care, but the editor is like the god of the movie, in my opinion, right? Ultimately, the final shape of all the raw materials are there because of the efforts of good editors. The other thing I wanted to mention about is boring multiverses. I'm up for people making boring science fiction or fantasy films in which nothing that's really supposed to happen in those sorts of films actually happens. Here's an example of a boring multiverse film. It's like Run, Lola Run, and we see 3 different versions of what happens. But unlike what Mary Pat pointed out, I would say, right, there's some sort of information transfer, right, between these parallel universes that makes learning possible, that makes adjusting the habit, which would automatically be what she would do, in these different circumstances. And when that's disrupted, of course, as with her father, it's particularly important. The third one is the only part where she doesn't have a conflict with her father, and also where she holds the hand of the person and demonstrates empathy. Another kind of boring multiverse would be one with changes so small that they aren't subject to human experience. Again, I just throw this out there because this is philosophy. We can talk about these things and entertain the concepts. Just an incredibly boring film. Pete, how long was Greed, that old black and white film?
Greed was like 4 hours.
Yeah.
And cut it up and it's...
So we'll double that. We'll make an 8-hour film, and it'll just be people going about their daily life. But the fun is that multiverse effects are having changes and branching are occurring at the subatomic quantum level, and we have no idea that these things are going on. But to circle back to something that Dan said, one of the things I think is interesting about the world of agency that you describe is, I do not think it is an unreasonable question to ask about it, could causally determined intelligent creatures be deceived as to their agency, or be guessing that they have agency when in fact certain facts, as maybe Spinoza would say, are unknown to them, right? And maybe will never be known to them. And I think that's also where Hobbes comes into this discussion and says famously to Descartes, you know, you aren't a thing thinking. There's just thinking going on. And so don't tell me what sort of thing is thinking. Anyway, I'm just curious, you know, whether we take an objective or a subjective perspective. If we try to empathize with Lola, we see the multiverse thing as having to do with choices and meaning and significance and possibilities. And sometimes those are dark, as you point out, Dan, I think quite aptly. From the objective perspective, the idea of causal determinism, that this one little change made a butterfly effect, all of this happen, is just so tempting, right, from the objective perspective. Because we're trying to say, what do these have in common and what it differentiates them, and why is that significant, right? But we do that all the time in life. It's just called life. And so I think I'll just stop there because I can't read anything more in my notes. Thank you.
I thank my panelists for their insights. I take a very deflationary view of this film. I don't think it has profound philosophical implications or content. But this time through, this is I think the 5th or 6th time I've seen Lola. And first was when it was first released. There are several things that got my attention, and these are more in the way of puzzles. It seems to me that revisiting the film would be useful perhaps to solve. The first is that when Lola is dying in the street, she says, "Stop." And that starts the next cycle. When Manni is dying in the street, he says, "No." And that starts the next cycle. So the characters in the film are driving the storyline. This reminded me of a famous play by Luigi Pirandello, 6 Characters in Search of an Author, and in which, again, the characters in the play are brought onto the stage, and basically the whole production comes out of their conversation with each other. There's something going on here about storytelling. The film gives us 3 storylines. Well, it could have given us 6, it could have given us 16, it could have given us 20, except then it would be a pretty long film. It gives us 3 roughly 20, 25-minute storylines. And we all know that you can take a common setting and a common set of characters and spin out an indefinite number of plot lines, and you get different stories. Are these alternate realities? I don't think so. I think they're just different stories. What intrigues me most this time around is who's telling the story, and if the story has a point, what might it be? I'm amused that in the credits at the end of the film, there's a wonderful little blip. It's easily missed. There's a long list of minor characters who are being given their names, and then there's the phrase in German, "und vielen anderen," and many others. And it broke me up to see that, and many others. Similarly with the stories that make up the film, and many others. I'm curious about the power that Lola has to restart her own story. I'm curious about the power that Manni has to restart his own story. What is this power? Where does this come from? How did they get it? Why don't they use it more often? And so on. The second puzzle I'd like to raise is partly thanks to Mary Pat's comment. There are a lot of things in this film that stay the same. The mother stays the same. The overall setting stays the same. It's the same city. Lola runs pretty much the same route, at least early on. By the time she gets to the bank, things start to change after that. The setting in which that all this occurs is largely the same. Many of the people are the same. Mr. Meyer is always there. The hapless Mr. Meyer, who's just sort of, and he always gets his car crashed with these three guys that he doesn't want to get on the wrong side of. There are lots of other things in the film that stay the same. So something is going on about sameness and difference in these storylines. I don't know what it is, but I'm puzzled by it. I'm similarly puzzled about Lola and Manni's power to restart their own stories. And I think one further thing. In the last version of Lola's story, when she's running down the street, having missed the meeting with her father has left the bank, we're all sort of saying, now what? And of course she's saying, yeah, now what? And it is as if she were saying a prayer as she runs. Help me, help me. Just this once, help me.
I think I said that taking the bar exam, just this once.
Yeah. I did that the first time I was examined for my PhD. Didn't work. And of course, then she gets in the ambulance and performs basically a miracle, helping bring this man back from the verge of death. And here, perhaps, is a larger thing that connects some of these disparate thoughts together. Death is redone repeatedly in this film. And that, after all, is the one thing we can't do anything about, that we can't redo. Thank you very much.
Maybe a minute or two, if any of you want to, in order, Richard got to respond to everyone, but if there, any of you would like to respond to someone else, and then we'll open up for Q&A.
I just have one comment. In terms of a kind of link between them, this could be an example of negative film criticism, analogous to negative theology, Richard. I don't know. The idea is that, just like some philosophers who, like Simone de Beauvoir and John Dewey, instead of saying, here's how you solve the problem, they say it's important that we not tell people how to solve the problem. Right? It's important that people work through political liberalism or something like that. And so I wonder if there were conscious decisions made, I don't know enough about the making of the film, the writing, to leave the connection ambiguous or the thread ambiguous. Obviously it has a happy ending, that's one thread. But I wonder if there might have been a decision to leave that up to the audience and to provide them with at least one key question leaving the theater, which is, why these three versions? I agree with you. There could have been many others. Yeah.
Well, moreover, a happy ending. Well, unless there's a fourth story, or a fifth story, or a sixth story, or N+1 story.
We chop these three out of a continuum of stories.
Yeah, and I'm deeply suspicious of this happy ending. The film has made me suspicious of this happy ending.
So you mentioned puzzles. So I've always been puzzled by Dad's relationship with Jutta, or the woman from the board of directors, because I was trying to figure out, what does that say about Lola's place? Because at one point he mentioned something about having a wife and 3 kids.
Yeah.
And we know nothing about these other kids, if she's indeed even his child, if Lola's even his child. But I've always been fascinated by that sort of subplot and what it means and implies and so forth, because we really don't, we see it spin out in different ways, but we really don't get any sense of what her role is, what their relationship is. At one point he says, I'm leaving you, I'm leaving your mom, and so forth. But that's always been the puzzling part of this vignette to me.
There's a point of sameness also.
Right,
and that
exactly.
That is Jutta's pregnancy.
Yeah.
is the same. It comes into all three of the stories.
Yeah, who's
And
the
something-
father is.
Who the father
right.
is, is sort of suspended.
Yeah.
And she asks him, she asks Lola's father, I've forgotten what his name is, Papa, the same question. You know, are you happy to have a child with me? And he answers it the same way. He always says yes. I kept waiting, you know, for this to be a decisive moment where he changes his mind and says no. What would happen then? But it doesn't. And so I like you, I'm sort of puzzled about, you know, what is this about? Why is that all the same?
Well, he seems to be refusing the relationship. He's, right, in each case, he's starting over. In a sense, like the no and the stop, he's putting a stop to his life as it's been and making some kind of radical shift. The other thing, I think sameness and difference is one of the key philosophical points. But isn't that, I mean, this is, if further the agency at all, there has to be some kind of a balance between sameness and difference. If the world was just to be completely chaotic and every time it ran there was some, you know, completely different occurrence, then there would be no agency. And it was wrong. If things turned out exactly the same every time, there wouldn't be agency either. So I think that's carving out some kind of a space for thinking about how could the action be originating from me, rather than just originating from pre-existing causal conditions or just chaotic chance in which, right? So just because there are different futures, certainly doesn't mean that we're talking about agency.
Yeah.
And that would be the thing here is, I mean, is it just subjectively experienced as
Yeah.
agency? So the compatibilists want to say, it doesn't matter, you experience your own actions as free.
Right.
But I would think of a more ontological case where the agency has to be in the world if it's going to be qualified for me as an agency. And that means not just in my mind, but thinking about the structure of the world.
There's something very curious also in the third iteration of the story of Lola and Manni, as we get right towards the end of it. So Lola shows up in the intersection where the grocery store is that Manni is proposing to rob. And she's got all the money in the bag and so on, and there's not another single person within sight. In the intersection, in the streets, there's nobody coming in and out of the store as there was in the previous versions. There's not another single human being anywhere to be seen. What's up with that?
Well, and I've also always been intrigued by the fact that the woman who is visually impaired is the one who sees or allows Manni to see what's going on. And I think that, you know, again, not to focus too much on the role of women, but they really do play such an integral part throughout this film in various ways. And so then we have to come back, if Lola is the protagonist, what does this mean or say about her life, and what the possibilities are for her? Because we don't really know that much about her. We know her as a daughter, we know her as a partner. We suspect maybe she doesn't have a job from what her dad says at one point. So, but yeah, I mean, it's fascinating that we know that we have so much context and then we have none at the same time. So, yeah.
And Manni doesn't seem like a great pick.
Well, he is kind of cute.
Oh, he's
I was just
extremely
going to say
handsome.
that. But, you know, apart from that, I mean, you're right. He didn't seem like he was like, you know, the pick of the litter in some other respects.
I think from the credits, it was apparently his mother that was playing.
The blind woman, yeah.
Oh, that's perfect.
Same one. And so, yeah, that's a little wink right there.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Well, Lola is also, it's very curious that Lola still lives with her parents.
Although probably not that uncommon in Europe, you know, and now we're seeing, we have these failure to launch people in the US. I should put it in a pejorative way, but we know how expensive housing is. But you're right, I mean, so what does that say about her and her relationship to other humans in the world? Yeah. So.
What great comments. Questions from the audience here? Ask away. Or other observations you want to draw to our attention about the film?
It's my understanding that the man in the ambulance at the end that Lola revives is the security guard that she gives
Yeah,
the
I
stare
think
at
so,
death.
yeah.
So I just want to be sure that she not only revives him but causes his heart attack.
Yeah, excellent point.
Yeah.
What Lola gives, she also takes away.
Yeah.
That's right.
That was the point in the film where I wrote hashtag Lola is a Jedi. They keep having new mysterious powers that crop up, and healing was apparently one of them.
This is something Greg Benford, the great science fiction writer, once called wanton mechanics.
Oh,
You want them, you get them.
yeah.
Scotty says to Captain Kirk, Captain, if we reverse the polarization on the phasers and hook it up to the star drive, we can create the hitherto unbelievable long particles that will wipe out the enemy fleet and save us. You get yourself out of a problem by invoking some totally mysterious event or person or power or process that doesn't hook up with our intuitive common sense understanding of the causal structure.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
And that always makes for bad imagination and bad storytelling.
Yeah, the only thing that it gives you, like in Star Trek, is that coherency across episodes and movies. And that's just fan service, really, is all that is.
Yeah.
Right? People say, oh, look at the world building. Well, you can make up any word you want, So, yeah.
And they did.
Yeah, they did.
Yeah, Kevin, I like that her superhero power is screaming.
Yeah.
Her superhero
Yeah.
That also stays the same.
Yeah, that
All
stays
three
the same
episodes.
too.
It doesn't occur in the second, though. In the second storyline, she doesn't scream.
She doesn't scream at all. But
The scream actually is in all three because she screams before the phone hang up to shut up Manni. And then she screams in the first one and it simply shatters the clock in Pa's office. And the final one is the scream that
And
shakes the
casino.
casino and gives her the second 20.
This, to me, is a clue that this is speculative fiction. And there's so much of it on television today where something bizarre or miraculous happens at the casino or in a public place. And it's a spectacle for us, but the people they're affected by it don't follow up on it. I mean, she should have been in cuffs, right, at the casino, I think. I mean, what she did obviously in some way was cheating. But no, everybody's like, she's the main character.
But do the
Well,
stories
except
get
there is that lovely scene there, as she is leaving the casino, everybody else is standing there just staring at her.
Yeah, that's
Dead
true.
silent,
That's true.
shocked.
But do the stories become more unbelievable, I think? In the first one, I followed what was going on and I was okay with it.
Yeah.
But in the second one, she robs a German bank. And, I mean, you don't let anybody leave the bank. And in the third one, forget about her hitting 220s in a row. I mean, the cage person gives her more in chips than he has in money. And your example of, no, when the casino security says you go, you go.
Yeah.
That's the end of it. And Manni he just robs the guy of the bag with the gun, basically, and gives the guy the gun. I don't even believe Manny's that stupid.
Please don't do that. I mean, just don't be putting ideas in people's minds.
I don't think there are any real German banks either that have a single, rather hapless guard with a handgun. I mean, any German bank I've ever been in had 2 or 3 guys with fully automatic weapons and bulletproof vests.
So I appreciate what you're saying, because how much of this is dependent on what the audience ultimately wants to see? I mean, we always think oftentimes of European films, don't have that Hollywood happy ending, but here, we're sort of like, well, where, what's going to happen? Is this over if, one of the 2 main protagonists dies, and then we see it go on. And I think, at least I, sitting as an audience member when I first saw this, I mean, I wanted things to work out okay. I wanted things to happen in a way that, that I felt some contentment with. And so, at this point, I mean, I like the fact that Tykwer was a relatively, inexperienced filmmaker when he made this film, and yet there was something about it where he managed to get our attention and made me and these 300 other people with whom I saw it respond to it. And so now we have the opportunity to look at it multiple times or to think about it in a much deeper way. But I think it was a successful presentation. I'm also fascinated by the fact that, I don't know how many American actresses, I mean, Franka Potente is beautiful, but I mean, she, her top's hanging off and, she's like, sort of not attired in the most stylish fashion and so forth. And I like that there was something that was fantastical and authentic about this film at the same time, and that appealed to me, I guess.
Films are, one set of critics I know called films attention engines. And Lola captures our attention. Absolutely right about that. And out of that attention grows an affection for her. And so I'm like you, I want this to work. I don't really care much about Manni. I only care about Manni because Lola does. I only care about her father because Lola does. Is involved with these men in various ways. We want it to work out for Lola.
Well, a lot of it's because we see her as an agent. We see her doing things, and I think that's a lot of what captures our attention.
Yeah.
It's
Well,
just
and much else. As David mentioned at the beginning, the music, for example, you did made much out of it as well. That captures your attention. That driving beat. The running that Lola does captures our attention.
But I feel that my understanding of the film is one from physics. I used this in a course to introduce ideas about chaos theory. And there is literally chaos in this. And I wonder if it's about the ways that Lola tries to navigate a world with chaos. In the first storyline, she goes to others for a solution. And I think that's what the gun is. Manni actually gets her the gun and shows her how to use it. And Manni has the idea of robbing the place. In the second one, Lola takes things into her own hands, disarms a bank guard, robs a bank, and it still fails. Things don't work out. And in the final ones, after the world didn't have a solution and she didn't have a solution, she finally goes to God. And Lola's God leads her to a casino. I think that's why there's only 3, because we are the type of people that when we have a problem, there are problems we solve ourselves, problems we go to others for, and problems we go to God.
Isn't it strange though, especially because Lola is the center of agency, as all 4 of you have said, but in scenario 3, Manni solves his own problem. And especially in the light of your comments, I find that really perplexing now.
But what about the blind woman is some kind of oracle. I don't know that she isn't part of it, because in the second scenario, she is a nun. When Lola runs through the nuns in the second scenario, there she is with her glasses.
Right.
So I think she is connected to God somehow, or whatever Lola's praying to.
It's so great that this 80-minute film is so rich, whether you love it, hate it, appreciate it, valorize it. I mean, it really is, and I think that that's part of its appeal, obviously. And I think that, and so maybe for me, when I talk about these other films that involve these alternate realities and, so forth, I think Everyone, Everywhere, All at Once, I think that some of those films don't lend themselves to discussion, really, but that one does. I mean, so I think that just having the opportunity to do this and to dive more deeply into it and get the perspectives of people who have noticed so many of the small things that make this film, I think, unique for its time or whatever. Because now, I think alternate realities, I mean, we've always seen storylines. I mean, I even think back to Rashomon. That's telling a tale in different ways, even though it involves different people. But I think they become more commonplace, but maybe as a device or a conceit rather than as something that's real. Although you might disagree because you were you were maybe, it's not that you didn't like the film, it's just that there were some things that puzzled you.
Yeah, I like the film very much,
Yeah.
against my better judgment.
Okay, just checking, yeah.
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned started by saying you're not interested in this kind of science fiction, but I think that's part of it. It's the love story that I think makes it plausible, and I think it's a natural part of love to wonder what would my life be like if I hadn't met this person, or what would her, what would his or her life be like if they didn't met.
And that's like Past Lives, that the film that, came out within the past few months, where you see these people who, were childhood best friends and quasi-sweethearts, and then they meet later and they're trying to figure out, what's gonna happen? I mean, and we don't know what's gonna happen. Yeah.
I think this gentleman is.
Brian, you had a comment?
I had a question about the music. Dan drew attention to music, the techno dance music. But there are two other pieces of music that are used. And I was wondering what people thought about the significance of that, what difference Day Makes, which is used in the first round, and then Charles Ives' Unanswered Question, which is used both in the first round and in the second round. And I should have paid more attention, but I can't remember if any music is used in the third, at the end of the third.
There's a kind of Arabic melody, and I think partly, maybe coming from a German context, there's a kind of air of mystery to maybe North Africa, and maybe a spirituality as well. So I'd like to tie in, but there is a kind of moment of transcendence in that third, that I think that Arabic music has a kind of a spiritual component to that. But the other two, I'm not sure about.
In the second episode, that song that it's sung in English, I found it hard to hear. I mean, I just had difficulty separating out the words and so on. But it's playing while Lola is running, and so I come away thinking I'm listening to Lola's own thoughts, and I wish I could have been this, then this would happen. I wish I could have been that, and something else would happen. And it goes on like that without any sort of resolution, as far as I could tell from what I could hear.
And that was part of the music that was written for the film, I guess.
Oh, okay.
But the other two pieces, What a Difference a Day Makes, and The Unanswered Question, which shows up twice, right? Why those? What's the significance of that?
I think
because I think he's too careful.
Yeah, I think that
Crass
there's a not too subtle in-joke there with what a difference a day makes, right? I mean, but I think that the reason why some piece of music like that was inserted is you end up with the problem of how do we signal that something really bad is going to happen in a film that is driven by pulsing action music the whole time, right? You do the reverse of what you would normally do. You would amp up the pace of the music and the tenor of it. They do the reverse. They slow everything down. The choice, besides being a kind of in-joke of that particular song, I don't have a clue about.
The Unanswered Question.
Because it starts that way too, right? The film starts with what's maybe constituent of the human condition is an unanswered question, as they say.
And I have a second question, just because I can't remember. What is it that the guard says to her on that third go-through? When she's standing there, he comes out.
You're finally here.
You're finally here.
Yeah, dear.
And then, or she saves his life. What's he saying? What is the film trying to do? That the point was to save this guy's life?
Yeah.
The point of the whole story?
Yeah. So
I think the point of that is the importance of connection. He can't reach very well in his condition, but he does very slightly move his hand towards her. And she then takes his hand and holds his hand and says, I will stay with him. I thought, the first time in particular I saw this film, I thought he was going to go ahead and die. And she was saying, I will wait with him while he dies. Well, it turns out, at least as far as we can tell, he's not dead the last we see of him. and his heart has settled down, according to the EEG readout. But there's something important there about, at that point, his connection with Lola and vice versa. But previously, when they meet outside on the steps of the bank, he looks at her in a way that he has not looked at her before. And she looks back at him in a way she had not looked at him before. So something has changed in the way they relate to each other. And perhaps that was the point.
There does seem to be a desire across these multiverse films to make connections, to break through this parallel fractured world. And we see that in Everything Everywhere as well, to find that person and connect to them.
Did you have another comment?
He actually wanted some help. So the symbolism of the circles with the clock and the spirals. So you see this first with a spiral bar, and they show its weird icon against the clock that's in it. And then you see the spiral in the bed linens in the two scenes that are in between. Bed linens have these little spirals. There's a spiral in the woman's hair above the roulette table below the clock.
Yeah.
And it seems he's constantly trying to compare a spiral to a clock, and I have no idea what to do with it. I mean,
In
the clock
the, in
is,
the first animation too,
yeah,
that's how we break out the
yeah,
animation.
she
is the
goes into
spiral.
a spiral into it.
It is possible to make a clock that is largely comprised of spirals. There's one in downtown Cambridge that my college had commissioned. And I don't know exactly how they did it. I don't know how it works. But there's a series of spirals that drive the clock's movement.
I'm learning so much that I never anticipated I would learn this evening. So thank you to my fellow panelists and to the audience for your amazing observations and remarks. Yeah.
Well, the spiral is what happens to a circle when it's
Right.
extended.
Right.
So maybe, the vicious circle can become a productive spiral when time becomes productive rather than just futile. So maybe there's something there that, she wins how to use the gun and she's learning. So it's not just cycling back to the beginning.
Anyone else? Question or comment? Okay, let's thank our panel again.